The H-1B visa. It's meant to be the U.S.'s way of attracting top-tier, high-skilled talent from around the globe, particularly in those vital STEM fields: science, technology, engineering, and maths.
Right, the engine of innovation, essentially.
Exactly. Think about that engine. Okay, but here's a question. Why does a system designed with such an important goal seem to be facing, well, so much friction?
That really is the central puzzle, isn't it? What's fascinating here is how the original intent of the H-1B program seems increasingly disconnected from the realities faced by both the individuals trying to contribute
Hmm.
and, frankly, the American economy itself.
Yeah, exactly. So if you, our listener, have ever wondered why it's such a complex journey for highly skilled professionals to immigrate here, or maybe what the knock-on effects are for American innovation.
Or why some really talented folks end up going elsewhere.
Right. Why they choose to build their careers somewhere else, then you are definitely in the right place. This deep dive is for you. We're going to unpack the core challenges within the H-1B system and, some of the surprising outcomes, especially for professionals from India.
Yeah, and we'll be digging into policy briefs and research reports that have looked into this critical situation, really aiming to understand the fundamental issues at play.
Okay, so our mission for this deep dive is clear: to really get to grips with the major shortcomings baked into the H-1B system. And importantly, how these flaws are impacting not just the competitive edge of the U.S., but also the actual lives of skilled workers, particularly those from India.
It's a complex picture.
It really is. So with such complexity, where do we even start to make sense of it all?
Well, I think a natural starting point is just the sheer scale of the problem and the green card backlog. That illustrates it with striking clarity.
Okay.
We're talking about over 1.4 million H-1B workers currently caught in the queue for permanent residency.
Wow. Over 1.4 million people. That number's almost hard to visualize.
Mhm.
And here's where it gets, well, really interesting. A huge majority of those individuals are from one country, right?
That's correct. Approximately 72% of all H-1B holders are Indian nationals.
72%.
Yeah. And looking at the broader implications, this concentration, combined with existing immigration laws, creates some really profound bottlenecks.
Profound is, putting it mildly, we're talking potential wait times for a green card that can stretch, get this, up to 90 years for professionals from India.
90.
90 years. And that's because of the per-country limits, right? The caps on how many green cards can go to people from any single nation each year.
Exactly. 90 years. It almost defies belief, doesn't it? And this raises a huge question about the human impact of that kind of protracted uncertainty. What does that actually do to someone's ability to plan their life?
It must put everything on hold indefinitely. I mean, imagine trying to make any long-term decisions, buying a home, starting a family, just feeling settled, secure, when you're potentially facing a wait for permanent residency that's longer than a human lifetime.
Mm.
It's a level of uncertainty that's just difficult to comprehend.
It truly is. And this decades-long holding pattern, it has far-reaching consequences, not just for the individuals involved, but also for the overall strength and stability of the U.S. economy.
Absolutely. And speaking of how people even enter this system, let's talk about the H-1B lottery. It sounds incredibly unpredictable.
Yeah, the process for selecting who gets an H-1B visa isn't solely based on qualifications or, the demonstrated need for those skills here. It functions largely as a lottery.
Okay.
So for fiscal year 2023, only about 26% of the applications submitted were actually chosen. That's 125,580 visas granted out of a, frankly, staggering 483,000 applications.
26%.
Yeah.
Those odds are incredibly slim. And what's crucial here, I think, is that this lottery doesn't really differentiate based on how qualified someone is, does it?
Not really. I mean,
You could be at the absolute top of your field, maybe a recent PhD graduate from a top American university,
right.
and you still face the same uncertainty as everyone else.
Precisely. And what's fascinating here is the inherent inefficiency this creates. The U.S. invests heavily in educating some of the brightest minds globally. And then there's just no guarantee that these individuals will actually be able to stay and contribute their expertise to the American economy. It's a significant gamble, not just for the individuals, but, for the nation's future, too.
Yeah, you invest years in education, often taking on significant debt, expecting to build a career here, and it all just boils down to a random chance. You can see why this would lead highly qualified people to maybe reconsider their options, maybe look elsewhere.
Exactly. And even once an individual successfully gets that H-1B visa, their challenges don't necessarily end there. There's another significant constraint we really need to discuss: The limited ability to change jobs.
Okay, let's unpack this. So generally, H-1B workers are tied to the specific employer who sponsored their visa. What are the practical implications of that?
Well, looking at the broader implications, it significantly restricts an employee's ability to pursue better career opportunities or negotiate more competitive salaries or even just leave a negative work environment.
Because their legal status is tied up with that one employer.
Directly linked. Yes.
Right. So if you feel your contributions aren't being recognized or you're not getting chances for growth or maybe the company you work for is facing instability, your options are severely limited.
Very limited.
It begs the question, what happens to innovation and individual potential when career growth is so tightly controlled by just one entity? It creates a real power imbalance, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And this lack of job mobility can, unfortunately, increase the vulnerability of H-1B workers to potential exploitation. They might be hesitant to voice concerns or seek other jobs for fear of jeopardizing their immigration status and, potentially having to leave the country.
It paints a picture of a very constrained professional life. And it's not just the visa holders themselves who are impacted. Their families face their own significant anxieties, particularly concerning their children.
Yeah, this brings us to the deeply troubling issue of the children of H-1B visa holders aging out of dependent status when they hit 21.
Turning 21. Usually a moment for celebration, new beginnings. But for these young people, it can trigger a potential immigration crisis. Roughly how many children are we talking about who might be in this precarious situation?
Well, estimates suggest approximately 200,000 children of H-1B visa holders could potentially face the severe consequences of aging out.
200,000, that's,
Yeah.
wow. 200,000 young lives potentially thrown into uncertainty just because of their age and their parents' immigration status. What are the actual consequences when a child ages out?
Well, once they turn 21, they lose their status as dependents under their parents' H-1B. This can lead to a situation where they have to independently qualify for their own visa to stay in the U.S., which is often exceedingly
Or
difficult.
they have to leave.
Or they face the possibility of having to leave the country, potentially leading to really heart-wrenching family separations or forced relocations.
Imagine the emotional and psychological toll of that. A family that might have built their whole life here, contributed to their community, suddenly facing the prospect of being torn apart because of an, frankly, arbitrary age limit in the policies. It's hard not to feel a deep concern for these families.
It truly underscores the human cost of these systemic issues. And it's important to remember, too, that the H-1B visa itself is inherently temporary.
Right, that's a key point. It doesn't automatically lead to permanent residency. So what's the typical duration someone can stay in the U.S. on an H-1B?
An H-1B visa is initially granted for up to 3 years, and it can be extended, usually in 3-year increments, for a maximum total stay of 6 years.
6 years max.
Generally, yes. Beyond that, unless an individual has an approved green card application moving forward, they are typically required to leave the United States.
So you could spend up to 6 years building a career, contributing to the economy, paying taxes, and then be faced with having to leave. It sounds less like a pathway for long-term contribution and more like, I don't know, a revolving door for talented individuals.
In many respects, it functions that way. And what's fascinating when we consider all these factors together is how this temporary nature, combined with the other limitations we've discussed, ultimately has a significant impact on the United States' ability to compete globally.
Yeah, this isn't just about individual struggles, is it? There are much broader economic consequences at play here. How does the current H-1B situation affect the U.S.'s competitive edge?
Well, looking at the broader implications, the difficulties in attracting and retaining top-tier foreign talent directly impede innovation and economic growth in key sectors. For instance, a 2020 study indicated that 55% of the growth in AI-related jobs in the U.S. since the year 2000 was driven by individuals holding H-1B visas.
55% in AI. That's a really significant contribution to a cutting-edge field. So what happens when it becomes too challenging for these vital individuals to actually stay in the U.S.?
Well, high rates of denial for H-1B visas, or even just the extreme uncertainty, can incentivize companies to move job roles to countries where it's easier to access the necessary talent. Think countries like India, China, Canada.
Yep.
USCIS data between fiscal years 2015 and 2022 supports this trend of potential job offshoring.
So instead of these high-value jobs and the innovation happening here in the U.S., it's potentially being pushed to other nations. That's a concerning prospect for American leadership in these critical industries. And what about the argument that H-1B workers might be displacing American workers?
Well, the available data seems to point to a different conclusion. A 2023 analysis, I think it was Pew Research Center, showed the median wage for H-1B workers was around $108,000. That's considerably higher than the median wage for all U.S. workers, which was about $45,760. This suggests these are generally highly skilled, specialized positions, not roles that are necessarily taking away jobs from the broader workforce.
That certainly offers a different perspective on that argument. And are there specific regions in the U.S. that are particularly dependent on H-1B professionals?
Oh, absolutely. Major metro areas like New York City, Silicon Valley, the Bay Area, they have a significant reliance on H-1B workers.
Right.
Just to illustrate, New York City alone saw approvals for 372,100 H-1B petitions between fiscal years 2017 and 2022.
Wow, over 370,000 in just one city over 5 years. That really underscores the concentration of this talent in key economic centers. And these individuals don't just contribute to the everyday economy. They also play crucial roles during crises, don't they?
Indeed. During the COVID-19 pandemic, for example, approximately 3,310 scientists working in the U.S. on H-1B visas were instrumental in developing vaccines. According to USCIS approval data, from FY10 to FY19, their specialized knowledge was absolutely vital in tackling a global health emergency.
So when we talk about the H-1B system, we're talking about individuals making really significant contributions across a wide range of sectors, including critical roles in national emergencies. Now, let's maybe focus a bit more specifically on the experiences of professionals from India, given they make up such a large proportion of H-1B holders.
Yes. As we mentioned, the fact that Indian nationals represent about 72% of H-1B recipients means they are just disproportionately impacted by those per-country limitations on green cards.
So while the H-1B visa might offer an initial way to work in the U.S., the path to long-term stability, to permanent residency, is significantly harder for them. What does this reality actually look like in their day-to-day lives, their careers?
Well, the prospect of waiting decades for a green card creates this pervasive sense of instability and uncertainty. It affects their career progression. They might hesitate to pursue new job opportunities, even better ones, because of the complexities of transferring their H-1B status. It significantly impacts family planning decisions, maybe postponing having kids or buying a home because their long-term status is just so uncertain. And honestly, living with this constant anxiety undoubtedly takes a toll on mental well-being.
And as we discussed earlier, we can't overlook that very real fear that their children might face deportation after turning 21, even if they've spent most of their lives here.
That is a constant source of worry for many Indian families on H-1B visas. And the challenges often start even before they secure an H-1B, like when they're pursuing advanced education here.
How so? Because a lot of international students, many from India, come here for masters and PhDs, right?
Exactly. After graduation, they often use optional practical training, OPT, to get work experience. But OPT is temporary, and getting an H-1B afterwards, it's far from guaranteed. In FY 2023, only about 1 in 4 graduates who applied for an H-1B were actually selected in that lottery.
1 in 4. Those aren't great odds, especially when you think about the huge financial investment these students often make to study here.
Precisely. Many students from India take out significant loans, often over $50,000, to finance their master's programs in the U.S.
Wow.
So to face that level of debt without a reasonable expectation of securing stable employment and long-term residency, it creates a very significant financial risk for them.
It really sounds like the U.S. might be inadvertently pushing away some incredibly bright, promising individuals from even trying to build their careers here. And where might these individuals be looking instead? We've heard talk of a brain drain.
Yeah, the data does suggest a growing inclination among Indian H-1B workers to consider leaving. A 2022 survey found that 30% of them reported planning to leave the U.S. specifically because of these ongoing visa challenges.
40% planning to leave just because of visa issues. So what are the main push factors driving that decision?
It's a combination of things. The uncertainty around visa renewals, the lack of stability for their families, the absence of a clear, timely path to permanent residency, and frankly, the fact that there's strong global demand for their skills in tech and other specialized fields. Other countries want them.
It makes perfect sense, really.
Yes.
If you're facing constant uncertainty and bureaucratic hurdles here, and other countries are actively recruiting people with your skills, offering more stability, a clearer path, the incentive to leave must be pretty strong.
It is.
What are the potential consequences for the U.S. if this trend continues?
Well, the loss of this highly skilled talent weakens the U.S.'s capacity for innovation in critical sectors like AI and biotech. Major tech companies, Google, Microsoft, Intel, they face the risk of losing valuable employees as these individuals seek more stable opportunities elsewhere. It's a real talent attrition problem.
And it seems like one country in particular is positioning itself to benefit quite significantly from these challenges in the U.S. system.
That's right. Canada has really emerged as a direct beneficiary.
Okay.
Their immigration system, especially programs like Express Entry, offers a much more streamlined, predictable route to permanent residency, often within, say, 3 to 5 years.
3 to 5 years versus potentially decades here.
Exactly. And it's based on a merit-based point system that values skills and qualifications.
That's a stark contrast.
Uh,
So are we seeing a significant number of Indian professionals actually making that move north?
Yes, absolutely. Over 100,000 Indian nationals got permanent residency in Canada between 2016 and 2021 alone.
Hmm.
That represents a substantial influx of highly skilled individuals.
Over 100,000 in just 5 years. That's a significant shift in migration patterns.
Yeah.
And what impact is this having on Canada's economy, its innovation scene?
Well, a 2023 report by the Conference Board of Canada highlighted that immigrants, including a large share from India, have made substantial contributions to the growth of Toronto and Vancouver as major tech hubs. And overall, immigration has been shown to boost Canada's GDP and productivity.
So it really appears that Canada's gain is at least partly a consequence of the gridlock and challenges within the U.S. system. It highlights that comparative advantage, you mentioned predictable, family-friendly policies, are successfully attracting professionals who might have once aimed primarily for the U.S.
Precisely. Now, it's almost impossible to discuss the H-1B program and its challenges without at least, touching on the political climate around potential reforms.
Yeah, it feels like this has been debated in Washington for a very long time. What are the main perspectives? What are the core arguments on each side?
Generally speaking, you have pro-reform groups. They tend to advocate for increasing the number of green cards available, making it easier to retain STEM graduates, and providing better protections for families, especially on that aging out issue.
Okay, things like the Eagle Act or Staple Act we hear about sometimes.
Exactly. Legislation like that reflects those goals. On the other side, you have restrictionist groups. Their priority is often protecting American workers, and they argue for stricter regulations on the H-1B program to prevent potential wage depression and ensure U.S. citizens get hiring priority.
Right, two very different viewpoints. And given these differing, often strongly held views, what's the likelihood of any significant legislative changes actually happening soon?
Unfortunately, the current high level of political polarization in the U.S. makes reaching any significant bipartisan consensus on comprehensive immigration reform, which would include major H-1B changes, seem quite unlikely, at least before 2026, maybe even later.
So it seems the system is kind of stuck in political gridlock for now, and major challenges we've been discussing are likely to stick around for the foreseeable future.
That seems to be the current assessment, yes.
Well, to sort of bring everything we've discussed together, it's quite clear that the H-1B system, especially in how it affects Indian professionals, is grappling with some pretty fundamental flaws. And these flaws seem to be actively undermining the United States' ability to maintain its competitive edge globally.
Yeah, the long, growing green card backlogs, the unpredictable lottery, the limits on job mobility, that deeply concerning aging out crisis for children, and just the inherently temporary nature of the visa itself. They all add up to this critical problem.
And beyond the undeniable economic impact, there's a very real, significant human cost here. The pervasive uncertainty, the constant instability, the emotional toll it takes on skilled individuals and their families who are just trying to build lives and contribute their expertise.
Absolutely. And if these fundamental challenges aren't effectively addressed, the United States really risks a continued erosion of its leadership and innovation. We could see more talented individuals looking towards countries with more welcoming, stable, and predictable immigration policies like Canada.
So here's maybe a final thought for you, our listener, to ponder. Considering the absolutely critical contributions H-1B workers make to the U.S. economy and innovation, what fundamental shifts in immigration policy might actually be necessary to reverse this concerning trend? How can the U.S. ensure it remains a global leader in tech and science in the coming decades?
And perhaps even more importantly, what could be the long-term consequences if the current significant challenges within the H-1B system are just allowed to persist without meaningful reform?
It's definitely a complex issue with really far-reaching implications for all of us.